Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. So Freudian slip there. This is a Ukraine war live update, live stream with you guys, legends. I do apologize for having done my hits and losses video first thing this morning, well, sort of first thing. Had a cup of tea down the end of the garden. And it was restricted by YouTube, so I ended up trying to play around with it, get areas of it blurred that I thought might have been. Because what happens is when you release a video, there are certain elements of a video that the automatic bots scrape through, and that it triggers the bots, right? They're looking for like war footage that they won't like advertisers to have their adverts next to. But some of those bits of footage are clearly not a problem, but they trigger the automatic system, so they think it's really horrible footage, and I often get caught out with that. And so I then have to go back and try and blur out the stuff that I think they have an issue with, even though it's not a problem bit of footage, and then you blur it out. But because that whole footage has already been put up there, I've explained this to you guys before, they see a re-upload of basically the same footage but with blurred stuff. They don't really register the blurred stuff, so they think it's the same footage and they continue to restrict it. And so what happens is I then go, well, either I've got to re-record it or I do a live. So here I am doing a live. I did release that to my members earlier, so sorry, you might see some of the same content. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, we are going to start with mapping though tonight. I am maybe being joined with James from Why Ukraine. I am joined obviously by you guys, thank you, and a bottle of Cruz Campo, which reminds me of my time living in Gibraltar. Used to drink that. It was great when I lived in Gibraltar as a young lad, sort of 14, 15, 16. Did I come back at 17? That kind of age group. The drinking age was 16 in Gibraltar. So I used to go down to pubs and I could drink, and it was absolutely fabulous. And it was quite some good times out there. But yeah, Cruz Campo is a local Sevilla beer. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Let's go on to the mapping. So we are going to go to my map, OBS, and I'm going to move this over to that screen. So just to react to your comments, I might have to look sideways. Sorry about that. So we have a lot of red pins on the front line at the moment. Nothing seems to be happening up in the north of Kharkiv, which is interesting. It's not to say it's quiet, but there's been no significant move there in terms of controlled areas in recent days. A lot of pins up and down the front line. I think this is fairly worrying for the Ukrainians. I think they are stretched thin, particularly in this eastern front, kind of the Donetsk front here. It is, I think, particularly challenging. Now, my views, I've not changed my views at all. My views are that the Russians are in all sorts of trouble. They are spread really thin. But as they've become thinner and thinner spread, so have the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians have taken a long time to get their mobilization up and running, which I think it is now. But while they're training troops and whatnot, they just don't have a depth in defense and no reserves, which means that as soon as the Russians poke a hole somewhere, the Ukrainians have to try and plug that hole with people who are already fighting elsewhere. And you know, the poor 3rd Assault Brigade seem to be doing everything. The 47th and the 3rd Assault Brigade appear to be fighting everywhere, and it is a real challenge. So I think that there are some particular worries around this Pokrovsk region. I think Krasnohorivka has, you know, had it. Certainly a worry getting closer and closer to the road that connects Vuhledar to Konstantinivka. Toretsk and New York, I think, are just about contained. But yeah, definitely challenging. And then, well, we'll come to Cheziv Yar later, but Surrey Maps claims that the Russians have got across the canal there, which would be super worrying there. And Andrew Perpetua talks about up in this area that it's a bit of a worry. This is one of his worries, a kind of 5 out of 10 worry, where Pokrovsk is an 8 out of 10 worry. I think is how he said it, and I'm pretty sure he was talking about this area around Pischany here. As they are trying to get onto the higher ground to the north of there. And he says that that's a bit of a worry too. But they are losing ground, the Ukrainians, and that is bad, obviously. But as I've said to you a million times before, this comes at a huge cost to the Russians, and I think the Russians, like the whole of Russia, is starting to creak. I think this war is really taking its toll on Russia, economically speaking. And they, as Andrew Perpetua did quite a large section of his video live stream last night on this, where he's talking about how the Russians really do have a challenge when it comes to personnel. So you might think that the Russians have 140 million people and Ukrainians have, say, 40 million people, 44 million people, probably down to sort of 30 million people these days, with all the refugees and people escaping because they don't want to be drafted. Well, the Russians have that same kind of problem. And he was talking about how really your kind of pool of people that you can effectively draw from, given that they are ring fencing lots of people in different sectors, are ring fencing people in Moscow, is probably 5 million people, and 2.5 million people have probably run away or like escaped Russia through mobilization and not wanting to be called up to the war, which means that actually Russia don't have that many people to draw from. Like on paper they do, but it's a bit like their army. A lot of it's like a paper army. And they are really struggling. We know they're really struggling because they're offering crazy amounts of money. They're trying to get people from all over the world to sign up for them. They are in desperate straits. And the more they draw from their population, the more that affects the labor shortage, which is already causing inflation. And if they go to a national mobilization, which is what they need to do in order to actually have any chance of kind of winning this war in a way that they might hope, that would be deeply unpopular. And I think that the country would start falling apart proper. And so they are in a dilemma where they really need more people, but they can't actually, they don't have that many people. Not as many people as some analysts claim to draw from. And also they've got a threshold that's much higher for when the population starts going, no, this war isn't our problem. It's not existential for us in the same way it's existential for Ukraine. I've said this to you many times before, sorry to repeat myself, but 50% of you knew. So anyway, Ukraine will will be more prepared to give their people to this war, or the people will be more prepared to sacrifice themselves for this war than Russians. You know, being called from, I don't know, Bratia or somewhere, somewhere over here, right? Being called from Yekaterinburg or Chelyabinsk down to Ukraine to give your life for something that's in a foreign land is very different from fighting for the existential future of your own country. So, sorry, I'm showing you something on a map that you can't see. So, point being that, if you're going to come from over here, Chelyabinsk, and fight in a war, you are not going to be as willing to sacrifice your life for that end goal of some expansionism from the Kremlin, whereas you are going to be more prepared to sacrifice your life for the future of your entire country. It ceases to exist if the Russians win. And so there are more people that Russians can throw at this, but actually there's not as many people as others might think. And also there are more Ukrainians that are prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, I think, than Russians that would be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, which means that you've got possibly more people you can draw from in Ukraine before you get to this level where everyone goes, right, that's enough, we've had enough. And I think that level will be reached far earlier for the Russians. And so all said and done, I think the Russians are in a lot of trouble, and they're using equipment that is suboptimal, and they're running out of stuff, but they've still got stockpiles of old kits, so on and so forth. And yet still, they are able to make these grinding gains because the Ukrainians are themselves spread so thin, and they've reacted too slowly throughout this war to mobilization. They needed to be at this point of mobilization much, much earlier than they were. And that means that the Russians are able to make these breakthroughs in a number of places and just throw everything at them. And I think that's what they're doing, because I think they realize that they've got to make the advances now, because now or never for the Russians. So you're seeing everything being thrown at the Ukrainian front lines, and the Ukrainians aren't able to contain them everywhere. And it's a game of whack-a-mole, but it's a really dangerous game of whack-a-mole that the Russians are effectively winning at the moment. But what does winning mean, and how able are they to sustain those victories, or those grinding gains on and on. So when you look at some of the um, sources here, this is Tim White saying, update from the front line from Bogdan Miroshnikov makes grim reading of Russia is advancing in numerous directions and already reached the outskirts of Vasily in Donetsk. Meanwhile, Novoselivka is no longer under Ukrainian control. So there are, if you look at that, there are all these places all over Ukraine that the Russians are advancing in, and that is a super challenge. I don't know which Vasily that is. It's probably, I mean, there's Vasilys all over the shop. You've got Vasily there, haven't you? But it's not going to be there because they're already controlling that. Anyway, point is that the Russians are making gains in most places, or in a lot of places. So here, as according to Syriac maps, the Russians have made it further north from Pischani, where they are trying to move towards the Oskil River, and this is on the Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea front line. So you've got Kupiansk up here, Svatova and Crimea. The Russians are making those gains to the north of Pischani, but also to the south along a tree line and expanding that tree line where they were previously up here just along that tree line. Now they have these fields. That's south of Berestova, and this is Novoselivska there that is under their control. But I think this is the area that Andrew Perpetua is worried about, because this is the high ground to up here that the Ukrainians would need to keep hold of to keep the Russians at bay. And if Syriac maps is correct here, then the Russians have the control of that high ground now. Be wary of Syriac maps' claims, because just because they're attacking somewhere doesn't mean they control it. But it is definitely a challenge for the Ukrainians here. We'll see if Andrew Perpetua catches up with the mapping here, or whether this was just overzealous mapping from Syriac maps there. But it's concerning here in that part of the northeastern axis. And then when we come down a little bit further, Andrew Perpetua has some gains for the Russians near Makivka, just approaching the outskirts there. A huge difference here between the two mappers. Syriac maps pro-Russian map, Andrew Perpetua pro-Ukrainian mapper. The Russian mapper in red here has Makivka largely under Russian control, whereas Andrew Perpetua, although he's seen some advances for the Russians, it's more that Makivka is a grey zone. But it seems to be often the case that, and where Andrew Perpetua lags behind, or I wouldn't say lags behind, I would say where Syriac maps is very like a Tigger with his mapping, like changing all the time as soon as Russia do anything. Quite often, if they are prepared to go and go and go again, the Russians, they do eventually take those places. And so it seems like Syriac maps is correct in the first place, when often they aren't correct. It's just that it ends up being true eventually anyway. Right, no change to the Terny and Tulska area. Serebryantski Forest, reporting from Ukraine, the YouTube channel states that this is an area of success for the Ukrainians. So this is somewhere where they are having more joy than other places, but it's pretty horrific there. Forest has been largely burnt down and destroyed. It's terribly sad. Now, when we come down past the Seversk front line, where the Russians have made some gains in Rostolivka and other places recently, no changes there over the last 24 hours, but we do have some change here to Chaziv Yar. And I've not seen this on any tweet from Syriac Map, so I'm wondering whether this is something they're going to talk about going forward. I've not heard this anywhere else. In fact, if you look at the ISW report from last night, this is not the ISW report. This is on my website, where Benny Pie has brilliantly done AI to summarize the summary to make it even more distilled. That's ATPGO YouTuber Guy. That's what that stands, but I didn't realize that before. youtube.erg.ui YouTuber Guy, ATP YouTuber Guy. Anyway, if you look at the Chaziv Yar section, Russian forces continue offensive operations, but no confirmed advances. So no one else seeming to agree that this has happened. But if it has happened, this is super serious, because the Russians have got across the area of the culverts here, where the canal at Chaziv Yar goes underground, and you have these pipes coming down here, and this is the area between these two sort of forest areas where the Russians are going to be trying to get across, because they can more easily get across there than across a canal. And likewise at the culvert down here, but no move there. But it's all up here by the canal micro district and then up to Kalinivka there, the Russians across the canal, all the way from the canal micro district up to the culvert up here. Now, no other sources are claiming that yet, so take it with a pinch of salt, and they are going to be trying this. But yeah, if that has happened, then you are going to start. It's the start of Chasiv Yar basically falling. I would have thought it's going to be really difficult for the Russians to take this place. It will come at a large cost to the Russians. Ukrainians will have a metric of success of minimizing casualties, so they'll be happier to pull back and bleed the Russians than to fight on ad infinitum in this place. But it was a town that was expected to fall. Like, everyone expected this to fall by the end of summer, including the battalion commander of Chasiv Yar, right? So it's nothing that should be like, oh my goodness, woe are the Ukrainians. Like, it was expected, and actually the Ukrainians have held on much longer than was originally thought. But again, take that with a pinch of salt. It will be a problem losing Chasiv Yar to the Russians, because if you're fighting, you've got to fight somewhere, right? So you might as well fight as far away as you possibly can from your really key places. And your really key places are Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and then up to Seversk over here. So you've got a sort of a semicircle, particularly these ones, where you don't want the Russians to approach here and interdict these places. And so Chasiv Yar is important for just containing the fight there rather than at Konstantinivka. Yeah. Now, at Toretsk and New York, I mean, there are claims that it's somewhat contained here, that the Russians are not making the gains they previously were. But here, as you can see in the Toretsk area, around Zalizhne, Suriyat Maps has the Russians taking a few streets there. And then further down in the New York area, an expansion of the base of the bridgehead here. Actually, this is an agreement with Suriyat Maps here that Andrew Perpetua has. So confirming that the gains made the other day were indeed correct. That's, it's bad up around there, but it's not as bad as it is along this whole Avdiivka or Pokrovsk sector, where both mappers, I'm not showing you deep state mapping at the moment because I haven't had time to change theirs. But you can see a large area of land taken here by the Russians, as according to Andrew Perpetua, and that's then a small further amount of land taken by the Russians, as according to Suriyat Maps. So they are pushing ever westwards and northwest towards this road, interdicting that road, although not quite in the area they previously been pushing in the northwest. But certainly it's a worry. And then as we come further down here, just huge amount of land, I say huge, relatively large amount of land that the Russians are taking, as according to Suriyat Maps, in Vasily. So that's a Vasily area. So it's this Vasily that the other source was talking about, this not being good. We have the Russians taking all of this area that are being kind of encircled, and that's Pokres. And then over here down the railway line on the way to Sahivka down here and Zhelane. So they really are making some fairly consistent gains there. Both mappers agreeing broadly that the Russians agreeing where the Russians are there. And then Andrew Perpetua pushing up his lines to be somewhat in line with what Suriyat Maps has said between that Pokres area and further down to the south here. You've got Novoselivka, Persia here under Russian control, as according to both mappers there. In fact, Andrew Perpetua now stretching the Russian defensive line even further than Suriyat Maps in that area. And then further to the south, gains, very wide-scale gains for Andrew Perpetua, actually all along here. These pins, basically, if you connect these pins, this is the line for Andrew Perpetua as it was previously. So, a lot of gains there right up and down this whole sector. And for Suriyat Maps, here was the gains here, and that's Yasno-Brodivka kind of area. So, yeah, really challenging for the Ukrainians there. I don't know whether they're going to be desperately trying to pull in more troops to that area. But the Russians are certainly gaining. The question is that all okay? Are the Ukrainians basically prepared to give up that land because they're just bleeding the Russians as much as they can until they get to their major fortifications, which have been built somewhere behind there. Don't know exactly where they are, but it's going to be probably near this blue line. That'll be the concrete bunkers and easier to defend, would probably require fewer people. So it could be that, as bad as this looks, I mean, this is if you want to look with rose-tinted glasses, there's good rationale for this, that as bad as it looks, the Russians are just taking some small amount of land until you get to the fortifications that were built in order to defend this land more properly. So they were always going to be fighting at the major fortifications anyway. Then when we come further to the south, we come to Krasnohorivka, and both mappers agree that the Russians have made gains to take most of Krasnohorivka. It's worth noting that although we think of Krasnohorivka as this area here, it actually does include all of this part of the settlement that stretches along to the side of this reservoir there. Now, I missed this earlier, but actually Suryat Map says that the Ukrainians have done a counterattack to the south of Krasnohorivka, and I've missed that out on my mapping. So sorry about that. I just wasn't expecting there to be a counterattack, but a counterattack down here. So there should be some blue pins on my map. Whoopee! Interesting. So Surat Map says the Russians continue advancing in Krasnohorivka, reaching the last streets of the core part of the town. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army re-entered the town from the south following another counterattack. So watch out for that one. Right, I'm just going to go to John Helling here, who talks of the whole Pokrovsk direction that we've just seen. So broadly speaking, I mean, you could say that Krasnohorivka is still part of that. It's a very southern part of that, but really this area is the Pokrovsk area. So John Helling says, Russia's burning Ukrainian troops to exhaustion. The situation around the village of Pokrovsk is deteriorating. Well, it's all been taken now. Russia is advancing at a rate of up to a kilometre per day. It has advanced 8 kilometres in 2 weeks. The Pokrovsk front is buckling. Some thoughts on the situation. A week ago, Ukraine lost the village of Pokrovsk after just 48 hours of fighting. Defending Ukrainian units fled, while the reinforcing troops from the 47th also had to withdraw due to lack of infantry. After the loss of the village, the Russians have advanced up to 1 kilometre a day. Some Ukrainian units have even got surrounded in the midst of the Russian offensive, although they managed to break free. Multiple Ukrainian sources are now calling the situation on the Pokrovsk front critical. What has led to this situation? The situation on the Pokrovsk front is the result of many of the long and short-term challenges the Ukrainians face coming together at the same time. The most significant ones are the issues with leadership and with the manpower situation, which we've discussed since spring, he says. To start off with leadership, the Ukrainian sources are continually criticizing their own commanders for too slow, bad, or even self-destructive decisions. The troops surrounded at Pokrovsk apparently never got a command to withdraw. By the way, bad leadership has existed. It's really easy to think, oh my goodness, woe is Ukraine, but Russia have suffered with bad leadership for the entirety of the war. Like, pretty much everyone appears to be making some pretty dodgy decisions at one point or another. There are obviously some good successes for the Russians where they do things well, but if you go to the Second World War, or Vietnam, or whatever war you go to, bad decisions are made, because it's very easy to make decisions that are 2020 with hindsight. 2020 hindsight, retrospectively, you can appreciate such decisions from your perfect perch, but actually, wars are difficult, and there are all sorts of variables, and not everyone's perfect, and so there will be bad decisions. You expect Ukraine to make some terrible decisions, and they have done. To start off with leadership, he says. They never got a command to withdraw. Okay, so Ukraine still seems to expend the lives of its soldiers to hold on to as much territory as possible. It's politically understandable, but it does not mean that the commanders at the front line have very little. It does mean that they have very little flexibility and even need to leave their men in dangerous positions. The problem is exacerbated, I think he means, by the issue of manpower and reserves. Majority of the combat-capable Ukrainian troops are now at the front, even the 150 to 154 series of brigades. Russia has managed to create multiple crises over the summer, which have tied up the UA resources and reserves, and this is absolutely true. So, although the Kharkiv offensive was a disaster, it did pull people away, but it also pulled their own people away. I still think if the Russians had pulled all the people, had not committed the people to the north and committed them to places like Chasiv Yar would have fallen. Right. So actually, I'd forget that. But everywhere else, the Russians are pushing and probing, and doing this kind of deep battle doctrine where they attack kind of everywhere and then wait for weaknesses, and then when there is a weakness somewhere along that line, then they exploit it fully. And the Ukrainians just don't have the personnel to be able to deal with that. Okay, with little reserves left to solve these crises, Ukraine needs to move reinforcements from one part of the front to another. To strengthen defenses in one place, Ukraine needs to make another place vulnerable. The consistent fire brigading burns through Ukrainian troops. Many Ukrainian formations haven't received replacements in a long time, and when they do, the replacements may be of poor quality, either due to age or due to subpar training. The same applies to green formations sent to the front, who are just getting their baptism of fire. And of course, it's the same for the Russians, but the Russians are far more prepared to be able to do this and have more people to be able to burn through. Even though I said earlier on that actually my point earlier on is that they don't have infinite people, right? And it is a problem for them, but they still can burn through more people than the Ukrainians. Battered formations can rarely be pulled out the line because there is nothing to replace them. Russia, on the other hand, attacks the brigades and units that it has learned are either the most exhausted or the worst led or trained. It especially strikes at troop rotations. This is something that's been happening quite a lot recently. So what have happened at the Touretsk area and New York area, troop rotations there, I think was also happening along the Pokrovsk area as well. That whenever they find out about a troop rotation, they just hit them, because you've got troops moving out their fortifications and their dugouts and whatnot, and other troops moving in, and that kind of movement. No one's actually in the defensive positions they need to be, so that's the time you hit them. Crises have accumulated over the summer with Ocheretina, Kharkiv, Chasiv Yar, Touretsk, and now Pokrovsk. Russia has strived to exhaust the Ukrainians. Now, for the first time, it has managed to create multiple larger crises in different areas at the same time. James is with us. I'm just going to finish his thread, my mate. So you're muted. That's cool. Just going to say I can't hear you. With multiple fires to put out, Touretsk is still very much ongoing, and both sides are attacking in Kharkiv. Ukraine can't simply attempt to throw everything at Pokrovsk like it did in Kharkiv. Russians, on the other hand, have brought in units to lead the attack. Ukraine's new mobilization laws will hopefully make the situation easier over the autumn, but we are not there yet. So this is what I was saying earlier. They haven't got them trained up yet, and this is why it just happened too late. The reinforcements are still some ways away and of unknown quality. Russia definitely has a few weeks of even a cup, or even to even I don't know, that doesn't make sense, to try and exploit the situation, basically. Ukraine will need to come up with a solution to the problem at hand and the limited resources it has, and with whatever political constraints it has. Luckily, many Russian units are exhausted as well, and the Russian resources are not limitless. Russia has also failed to make the most of Kharkiv. Had something like this happened after Kharkiv started, the situation would have been even worse. Russia is less prepared to exploit this than in early summer. Ukraine has also managed to navigate precarious situations before. If they can stem or even exhaust the tide until the new waves of mobilize start appearing on the front lines, the crisis is averted. Russia seems to be throwing everything it has to break the Ukrainians before that happens, which is basically what I've been saying now for some time, that the Ukrainians are weak, stretched, and needing to have some rotation, some R&R, and the Russians likewise weak and stretched, but they're much more prepared to just throw everything and anyone at these lines, and that will still overcome the Ukrainians. It looks like James has lost connection there, so I'll just happily get on with the mapping. I've been unable to check out what you guys are saying in the live chat, so thank you for just, I'm sure, being awesome. It looks like there's some trolls there as well, so keep you guys busy if you don't want to listen to me babbling on, which is understandable. Right, so that's broadly the sort of thing I've been saying. So I'm happy that I seem to align with what other analysts are also talking about. Now, we go back to the Institute for the Study of War, just a couple of random nuggets of extra information here. Ukrainian GURs reported using cheap drones made of styrofoam and plywood to locate Russian mobile fire troops and air defense systems. So that's maybe something James can talk about. He's into building drones, I think, at the moment, or something. He'll let us know about that, I'm sure, in a second. A Russian highlighted the Russian military's struggle to supply newly created units operating in the Kherson direction with FPV drones and thermal images. So the Russians are really struggling. There are so many anecdotes we're hearing about how they're struggling to get food and resources, water to their troops. So yeah, as bad as it is for the Ukrainians, it's worse for the Russians, but they are just more prepared to allow their troops to suffer those conditions and then just throw them into endless assaults. James, how are you, mate?
I'm doing great. I'm here in the western part of Ukraine. Just got to my hotel that I'm sharing, and just had to take a shower because I smelled like a wildebeest. So you started at the perfect time. Hello, everybody who's there. Yeah, I'm here in the west of Ukraine. I'm going to spend a week building drones, and I think the problems that you were just highlighting, Jonathan, just speak to. We've been kind of coasting along, thinking that this war was, I don't know, we don't realize how thin the coverage and how knife's edge, razor's edge Ukraine really is and has been this whole time, And I can tell you, I personally know an entire battalion, I can't tell you which one, that got wiped out because they were waiting for supplies that never came. Material, vehicles. This is this delay that I blame Mike Johnson and Trump for, caused men to die by the thousands. And I think it's just really important to put that up. Then the second thing that you brought up about leadership, I was literally just today having a long conversation with a Legionnaire, a guy in the Legion has been here for months, and about, frankly, the shit show that is command and training, and it's true across all of Ukraine. It's probably worse in the Legion, arguably, some think, but I mean, I don't know. It's a constant argument. But it's like, how long is it going to be before the fish rots from the head? And is Sierski needs to go, or does he need to replace people? Well, who are they going to replace him with? They don't have anybody.
It's really difficult because you're in the middle of a war, and this is difficult enough in peacetime where you got to try and reform and change things. And we've seen that Russia tried to do that and failed dismally. Then they started this war using battalion tactical groups, and then found out that wasn't working for them, and they've gone back to the old Soviet ways, and they're trying to change people. And so it is difficult. And when you're at war and you've only got so many people, and people are also dying, so your pool of experienced soldiers is always being attrited down. Then trying to replace key people with someone better is not easy. It's not like going out into the business world and saying, well, I'm just going to put out an advert now and it gets someone, and I can attract people from around the world and this and that. And, you've got Ukrainian people only that can do these jobs, and they have to have experience in the armed forces already. And so most of those people will already be in position. It's just not as easy as one might think is what I'm trying to say.
It's putting the rails down as the train is coming down the track is really what's happening. And there's just problems. I mean, and talking about the Pokrovsk front, the Pokrovsk salient, that really shows that I mean, okay, maybe they made a big show about Kharkiv and Kharkiv, the second Kharkiv offensive the Russians did, but I think that southern front, it shows that Avdiivka and that salient was ultimately the real focus, and has been the real focus for more than a month, for months.
Yeah. So I think if you rewind back to, I guess, like the White Line area, so 30th of May last year, before the Ukrainian counteroffensive, like the Russians at the end of that counteroffensive, you would have said, right, Chasiv Yar was the main number one, I think, area, and then probably down here as well towards Karakova, I think was their other main offensive, and Avdiivka probably wasn't, but then it kind of happened. There was a few things that happened, like they tunneled underneath the troops in the Avdiivka.
There have been several instances of
Yeah.
the Russians using these tunnels.
Yeah,
And
they did it up here as well in Touretsk, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and this speaks to command and leadership. Like, are there are the commanders on the ground not aware of where the tunnels are? Are those things not mapped out? Like, that's a failureship of that low level command.
Yeah, and so there were a number of things that happened, and then it just started piling on, and then it was that Ukraine ran out of ammunition, and the Russians started using aviation and the guided glide bombs like by the bucket load, and you put all those things together, and it just sort of folded in Avdiivka, and they hadn't built the fortifications back here because they weren't thinking this was going to fall, and so this was not an area that I think was top of their to-do list for the Russians, but it ended up and is now become, this is kind of deep battle doctrine, which is let's exploit the weakness. So this has then become the weakness. They've been busily trying to build fortifications back here, and Chasiv Yar has become less important, and possibly even Karakova towards there, where they did try Marinka, Herivka. They've tried really hard at Novomikhailivka, but taken tremendous losses. But they are supposedly making some gains into Konstantinivka, as according to Surat maps today. That would be really significant if that is true. Not seen that from any other sources, but if that's true, then that is the beginning of them taking Konstantinivka, getting access to this road, and then Vuhledar would eventually fall. So, but anyway, going back to Avdiivka, yeah, I think you just had a perfect storm of things for the Russians that worked in their favor. Ukrainians hadn't mobilized yet enough, and the 7 months of no ammunition, and put all those things together, and it was just, this is what's happened. And this happened relatively quickly compared to other grinding areas of the front line like Bakhmut that was very slow, I think, in relation to here and other places too. So yeah, difficult. Tunnels everywhere. I think it might be quite difficult. I don't know how easy it is to find, out where tunnels are. And I think they might have even, one of them, the more recent one, I think they might have dug the tunnels themselves, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah, or at least partially.
Yeah. And then the last place to mention, as I've just mentioned, Konstantinivka here, is that other area where the Russians are having success bit by bit and getting towards. So I said to you previously that the Russians tried to take Vuhledar. This is one of the key things they want to do. They want to take this whole area, partly because it gives them the Ukrainians HIMARS access to Mariupol. So if they can do that with the 84-kilometer HIMARS, and if they take this area here, then basically Ukrainians can't hammer Mariupol as easily. Obviously now they've got the 300-kilometer ones, but anyway, so they tried to take Vuhledar a number of times. They got absolutely hammered. You had the 144th Naval Infantry Brigade, and the other one as well, 155th and the 44th, whichever one, the two Naval Infantry Brigades that got absolutely battered there, trying to fight uphill, got hammered. And then the idea was like, right, if we can take Novomikhailivka, then we could go on to Konstantinivka and come down along the road, which is on the same heights as Vuhledar. And then they got hammered there and got stopped there, lost 320 vehicles. They're still losing vehicles even now, so they've lost even more than 320. And so it seems like they've kind of gone for the middle ground, which is, okay, let's just interdict the road halfway up. And actually, they're having a little bit of success there. So that's something to watch out for. So that's really the front line. No changes to the southern front line. Good news for the Ukrainians there. Nothing. Well, I say nothing. No changes on the Dnipro River Delta. But actually, there's lots of activity along these islands, and boats are being sunk. 10 a penny at the moment. Both sides are losing a lot of boats. And that's really the front line update. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Yeah, we were you were talking last week, and I don't know if you want to get into this segment briefly, but you were talking last week about drones and electronic warfare and that kind of constant cat and mouse game. And so some of the viewers on my channel, we've already talked about it, but the adaptations that Ukrainians are constantly making. So I unfortunately I should link. This shows you how bad I am at YouTubing. You see my link there, whyukraine.myshopify.com, not the buy me a coffee. It's you have to go the old fashioned way and physically copy it. Yeah. Try just whyukraine.com. It's my new. I actually bought the domain.
It's all right.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
That's it. So yeah, so we can just zoom in and look at these items right here. Okay. So there's a group of guys. It's a drone unit in on the Eastern Front. I won't say more specifically where. And they work with the FPV team. They are not the pilots, however. These are guys. They all sit in the basement, and I know that other people have made videos about that. They're all sitting in a basement in a house somewhere in a village, and they sit there with soldering irons all day, and they get these, just like you see in the fourth picture there, where they get about 100 drones a day. Yeah, exactly. They get about 100 drones a day. Every single drone has to be modified in some way or another. And this is how they are getting around this electronic warfare. So these devices, the devices that you see here are just some of the things that, different antennas that use different frequencies. And then these are different transceivers. So the two items on either end, the first item and the fifth item there are the video processors and transceivers that are intended to get around that electronic warfare, either by using signals that are not that that are outside of the frequency range of the electronic warfare, or in such a narrow band that it's able to focus and kind of punch through the broad spectrum electronic warfare, or to sort out sort out the signal from the noise, if that makes sense. And that's what these are. Now, the thing about it is, these guys get the drones. They come from different charities or NGOs, okay? But that equipment, those antennas, they have to pay for those antennas out of their own pocket themselves. And this group of, I don't know, about 8 or 10 guys, collectively, they pay about $5,000 a month for this equipment that they are putting on these drones to deliver to the drone team. And they do this to about 100 drones a day. And that is how Ukraine is beating this, the Russian electronic warfare.
Interesting, and yeah, awesome that you're helping to support that as well. Fantastic. Yeah, it is something I talk about an awful lot. The kind of, obviously, drone warfare in general. In fact, what I'll probably now go to, as I explained at the beginning of the video, my hits and losses video was restricted, so I'm just going to go through that now. If you don't mind if I just whiz through this. By the way,
it's a good way to get around it, man.
Yeah. Can I just say hi to Stephen Bendal? If you guys check out one of my recent videos, it's not a live. I pre-recorded it, but Stephen is married to a Ukrainian and he's from Norway, and he went to Ukraine just recently, and we spoke about Norway and Ukraine and his experiences. So go and check out my interview with him. It's a lovely chat. Thanks, Stephen. Good to have you on board. Okay, so the hits and losses, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. You would normally find at the bottom to this description to this video, but I don't think they are in this live one. But anyway, 1,180 personnel lost is pretty much where it's been recently. It's been a few days of under 1,000, but 13 tanks, a snip above the daily average. Same with armored personnel vehicles at 21. 51 artillery systems, about 3 times the daily average. That's good. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 72 vehicles and fuel tanks. So it's a very high category there, high number in that category. Now, 51 artillery systems. We have seen the Ukrainians really hammer the Russian artillery now for quite a long time. I know some of my members will have seen this already if they've watched my previous video. But here is Andrew Perpetual's loss stats for yesterday, which are phenomenal. And part of the reason they're phenomenal is because someone dropped a montage of a huge number of artillery pieces getting hit. Now, you'll notice that these are all damaged because it's very difficult to work out whether any damage has really been done. So when Andrew lists something as damage, it is like it could be a broken window, it could be a burst tire, it could be just, a drone that's bounced off and not really done an awful lot, and it could be a completely usable piece of equipment, or it could be much more fundamentally incapacitated. It's just very difficult to know. But with howitzers, especially towed howitzers, they have very few moving parts, and so if a drone hits it, it's quite often very difficult to tell whether anything has happened or not to that. It's not like a self-propelled howitzer that's got tracks, and the ammunition blows up, then the whole thing explodes and stuff cooks off. But a huge number of artillery pieces there, which is interesting because we don't often see artillery footage or footage of artillery getting blown up. But if we look at the Ukrainian losses, and this is good statistics for Ukrainians, it's about 3-1 in total losses. I'd say a little bit more. But in terms of the combat losses, Ukrainians have lost a few bits of kit here. Most of the APCs are Western pieces of kit. Apart from that MTLB at the bottom, you've got a few tanks, some howitzers, including a Panzerhaubitze 2000 that's been damaged. A Lancet's still causing problems, shelling, Krasnopol laser-guided ammunition. So the whole plethora of different ways that the Ukrainian vehicles and equipment are being taken out there, and a number of civilian pieces of kit as well, but not too bad. The radar, the ANTPQ-50 radar, that's a bit of a worry that has been destroyed, slowly creeping fire. So I presume something blew up near it, and a grass fire came and consumed it, or something like that. I don't know. Then when we go to the Russian losses, the Pantsir S1, another one that I showed you, I think, the other day, that's taken out. So that's 2 have been on Andrew's lists over the last week, and they are pretty decent bits of kit for the Russian air defense there. Striz 3 electronic warfare piece of kit, then all of this artillery, just a huge number of bits of artillery. D30s are really common because not only do they have a lot of them in storage, but actually they are the howitzers that use the North Korean ammunition, I believe. And so it's kind of like horses for courses. If they're getting given all of this ammunition from North Korea, possibly to the tune of like 5 million, depends who you believe, or whether you believe every single one of those containers was jam-packed full of artillery ammunition, then they're going to need all the howitzers they can get to fire that ammunition. So that could be why you're seeing a lot of D30s. A number of tanks here, track garden sheds, different variants, number of BMPs. A good thing to note here is the number that are destroyed and abandoned rather than damaged. So the Russians, having the Ukrainians exacting quite a cost here on the Russians in terms of irretrievably lost bits of kit, a lot of MTLBs, just a whole mass of equipment. So that's a bad debt they offer to the Russians, and this is exactly the sort of loss list that the Ukrainians will want to see on a daily basis. There is the video footage of the montage of all of these howitzers being hit. So there's a D30, and then next one I think is an M46, which is an even older bit of kit. So just these montages sometimes drop from a particular unit that specializes in taking out particular things, and there you got like 20 bits of kit all on one video. But it doesn't mean that they've done that in the last 24 hours, obviously. And then, so that was actually, he dropped 2 lists pretty much in 24 hours. The second list that Andrew dropped closer to this morning was this one. And again, really good stats in terms of numbers for Ukrainian to Russian losses. It looks like 3 Russian to 1 Ukrainian loss there, possibly. Ukrainians losing a few boats, as I mentioned earlier, a couple of Bradleys being damaged, a couple of Senators, Rochelle Senators, the Canadian APC that some were complaining about because they're not very good for frontline activity because they're not mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. Of course, they're not designed to be. So using them in that role is probably ill-advised. So some people were complaining about them, but they were never meant to be that kind of vehicle. They've been given well over 1,000 of them by the Canadians. So then we have, and I think they're selling them a lot as well. But yeah, not too much to note really in the list of Ukrainian stuff. Russian stuff, they lost that Su-34 that crashed the training Su-34, a load of surveillance and comms equipment, a whole bunch of artillery again, tanks, BMPs, all sorts of the usual equipment. Just another big day of losses. So, we look at these statistics, and these are visually confirmed statistics. You can't really argue with this too much. There isn't a selection bias. Andrew Perpetua's talked at length about his what he goes through to get these stats, and he tries his hardest to to look at as much Russian footage as he possibly can to make sure he's not having a selection bias. So then when you look at the map and you think, yeah, things are looking really bad for the Ukrainians, the silver lining is that this is coming at a massive cost to the Russians. But of course, like I always say, they are just better able to sink those costs than the Ukrainians are. But it really is like, this war will be the end of the Russian army for for a generation.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that before I
just
race on?
a few questions I have. First of all, about this list, with all these howitzers, are they is that because that they're just somebody dropped a bunch of kind of a data dump, and this might be from the last 6 months or 3 months?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably not for that long, but yeah. So what happens is all you can do is look at the published footage, and they also geolocate it. So there's just a massive database of stuff that Andrew and his team do. But yeah, basically you'll get a dump that and you'll see here the timestamp for each of these is given. So for the video and on the original documents that he links. Where's he put it? Oh, it's not there. It'll be linked underneath or above. Anyway, he will have the original document itself as well. So if I go back to that was the one afterwards. If I go back to this one, he's talking about all that stuff here. I don't know. Oh, he hasn't linked it. So he normally links the original document. So I'll show you the one from today, which will be linked up here. So here, public version. So on the loss list, he also gives you so he doesn't take the screen grab of that, but to the right is the URL that gives you the evidence. So these are all visually confirmed. You can go and double check them yourselves. He has a database. He tries his hardest to take out duplicates and whatnot with his team. But yeah, they are going to have stuff that is just dropping. That's 20 things that's probably taken out in the last 2 weeks, right? Yeah. So yeah. But what will happen is that averages itself out over time, and so it still is just an accurate representation.
So the other thing, so Aussie Bugger in our chat said the vids I've seen,
Aussie Bugger,
yeah, the vids I've seen, they tap the barrel with an RPG, copper shaped charge punches a coin size hole through the barrels, rendering them useless. So there's no big bang, I guess.
Yeah, and that you see several types of hits happen. I mean, that's when it goes well. But then I've also seen lancets hit tires and the legs of them being hit. So yeah, when it does work, obviously you can take out a howitzer, of course. But it's just difficult. What the problem is with FPV drones is if there is no spotted drone, then your footage that you're using is the FPV drone, and that just cuts out, and you often can't tell what damage it's done. All you know is it will have done some damage.
Something.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the last thing I would say about it is I know that it looks really good, 3 or 4 to 1, but really Ukraine needs to be doing at a minimum, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1 to be able to win this war.
I've always said intuitively I've operated at a 3 to 1 intuitively, but there was no reason I chose 3 to 1 other than it intuitively seeed like a decent benchmark. But the
3 or 4 to 1 is break even. Basically, is a stalemate essentially, and I mean, really talking about manpower more than equipment.
Yes,
equipment is even more valuable for Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you hope with this. For the Russians of equipment is that you lose trained people as well, ideally. So if you're going to take out a self-propelled howitzer, then you're going to lose the experienced crew inside potentially, and so it's not just about the equipment. But yeah, absolutely, the higher the ratio, obviously the better.
And the other thing is, a lot of those the Ukrainian damaged equipment, it's possible that the crew survived in those cases,
Yeah, well, yes. So things like the Bradleys, but actually, I've seen an amazing amount of BMPs be hit and think there's no way anyone gets out that live. That thing has fundamentally exploded, and then you see like 20 people run out, and you're like, "What the hell?" But then you don't know if there's internal injuries and other things, and they drop down, 20 meters later. Now, there was another bit of footage, I think, possibly in Krasnohorivka. Interesting bit of footage to show a fairly big attack here. There's 6 vehicles that attack. But what I noted earlier on my previous video is that look at the amount of vehicles that are blown up around here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. I don't know what that is. That could be 8. And then, stuff around here. So it's just incredible. But this looks like the Ukrainians repelled this attack with using artillery as opposed to ATGMs or mines. And what happened here is one of the vehicles comes down here where 2 have already been, and it blows up here, and it looks like it gets hit directly by a shell, and then another shell blows up in the here in the wooded area here. So it looks like they're getting peppered, and another vehicle then reverses, one that's down here reverses up here to see if these guys are all right, and it gets blown up as well. And apparently this attack was repelled. But just to note that they're starting to use artillery ammunition a bit more freely, so maybe that's a reflection of having more ammunition. That this is a large attack of 6 vehicles, but still not like the huge attacks we were seeing at the beginning of the war, although they did use an attack of 57 vehicles the other day, which was massive, but that did get repelled. So there are always questions about, are they using fewer pieces of kit because they just have fewer pieces of kit, and all those normal kind of questions. There was the talk of the 222 strategic bomber getting hit all the way up in Olenia airfield, 1,800 kilometers from the front, from Ukraine, up near Finland. That is a really significant strike if that did indeed happen. You had the Su-34 that came down that was a training plane. So again, Ukraine are going to like to see that. And then there was talk about 3 helicopters being taken out by sabotage recently. So on July the 21st, a Mi-28, a Ka-226 were taken out, and a Mi-8 was destroyed. So interesting there. Someone saying today a Tu-134 was also targeted. So sabotage apparently being responsible for that. And some of that has been videoed and is on satellite imagery as well. So there's evidence to support those claims. So again, here, claims to the nature of that being sabotage. So that's really useful that Russia are losing equipment to accidents falling out the sky, and then to sabotage, and then to Ukrainian drones, so on and so forth. So some good news for the Ukrainians there. An exploding gas pipeline is what the Ukrainians are going to want to see as well. 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine. Goodness knows why that's blown up, but anyway. That's happened in Yamalo-Nenets, so happy days for the Ukrainians there. Moving quickly on to the distant strikes that took place last night. So this is now we're going to be getting ready again for this happening again. But 7 out of 8 Shaheeds were shot down, and 1 Kh-59 missile. What else happened? There were strikes in a number of places, both this morning and yesterday. So Kharkiv was hit, and I wonder if that's hit by S-300s again. That stopped happening because the S-300 batteries were taken out in Belgorod when those ATACMS were brought to bear across the border. But it looks like S-300s might have been used a couple of times recently against Kharkiv again. So I don't know. But I don't know for sure. There was also talk about yesterday 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles taking out some targets in Dnipropetrovsk, and there being secondary explosions. Don't know what was hit there. You don't always get to hear about the Russian successes because the Ukrainians do a fairly good job of keeping a tight lips about what gets hit behind the lines for OPSEC reasons. And so we generally hear more about Russian hits than we do Ukrainian. And drones were very active last night in Kursk region, where they took out a couple of those big drum things, storage facilities, oil storage units.
Fuel. Yeah.
So this is one that's been hit previously, but again, the big explosions there, lots of fire. So that's another oil depot hit in Kursk, and also a substation was taken out in Kursk as well. So success for the Ukrainians there. Volume of 7,000 cubic meters, used primarily to meet the needs of the Russian army as well. So that's the Polivaya oil depot. 11 tanks there, and a couple of those tanks have been taken out previously and now targeted yet again. So good news for the Ukrainians. And then good news that a strike in Saki airfield on the 26th, the night of the 26th, a couple of nights ago, 2 or 3 nights ago, Saki airfield in Crimea. Now there's satellite imagery to show that a Su-30 SM, so that's I think a naval I presume some kind of anti-ship or more of a naval variant of the Su-30 was destroyed, and probably another Su-30 SM damaged by debris. So that's good news again for the Ukrainians. So they're having some successes here.
Where was this?
So this was in Saki airfield in Crimea. Yeah. And then finally, I just mentioned that apparently UK is not allowed to use Storm Shadows because they need permission from the French. So what? I don't know. Yeah, but there's lots of discussion about whether this is definitely the case, and have the French not given permission, because it's a jointly constructed missile, the Scalp and the Storm Shadow by MBDA. Although Keir Starmer said, yeah, you can use our missiles, and then the MOD said, actually, no, you can't use them into Russia, and no one knew quite why. People didn't know whether it's the US that was saying you couldn't, or whether it was the other people involved in the construction of the missile. And the Times,
both.
It could have been. The Times has reported that it's the French involved in that decision, and that they are waiting for a confirmation that they can. Right now, I did a whole section on Mali, and this is interesting. I don't know if you've heard anyone talk about this today. James.
No, I briefly saw a headline, but I didn't see this. Yeah, okay, I did see this yesterday when I was talking on my live stream about people. Wagner getting their butts kicked in Mali. I didn't see that.
Yeah, so it seems to be possibly a couple of separate incidents, but there's talk about 80 Wagner being. I mean, I've seen the footage, and it is pretty horrific. And there's lots of dead bodies, and there's lots of burned bodies, and there's lots of burned vehicles. So I can't show stuff, but Wagner did get severely beaten here, and 80 lost and 15 apparently captured. What else can I say about this? So, sorry.
What I didn't see was who did it.
So it appears to be the Tuareg rebels who are against the junta there, the junta, the military junta, who Wagner are supporting, right? So you had in some of these Sahel countries, the region of Africa, where you've had all these coups, and you've had France and the US kind of repudiated and being replaced by with their security, at least, by Wagner and Russia are helping themselves. We'll secure you if we can have our hands on some of your diamonds or uranium or whatever. And here they are in Mali, and 80 have been killed, 15 captured, and supposedly the commander of the 13th Assault Detachment, that's a call sign Rusic has said, sorry, that's not him that's died, but he's saying that that 2 key people have been killed as well. It's not mentioned there so much as here. Yeah, so Anton Yelizarov, who has a call sign Lotus, although some people have denied this, but apparently he was the guy who was in charge of the Russians at Soledar and Bakhmut in 2023, or at least the Wagner, and also the guy in charge of the Telegram channel Grey Zone, which is Wagner's own kind of megaphone. Nikita Fedyanin, call sign White, was also killed. And to add some more intrigue to this, you've got, look, loads of burning stuff. I can't really show you that. I'll move on. What else? There's also a helicopter crashed, and I think that's a separate incident. During the battle, mercenaries lost several MRAP armored vehicles and a Mi-24 helicopter, but I've heard of another hard landing of a helicopter. So there's a little bit of not quite sure exactly what's happened, but it's been bad for Wagner. That's the guy Lotus with Prigozhin. He's supposedly dead. this is pretty shocking. The context of this is France lost about 40 people killed in action in Mali over 8 years, right? So to lose 80 in one attack and 15 captured and lose all that equipment, it was a big deal when the US lost 4 in Niger in 2017. Wagner just lost 80 in a single engagement, including the owner of the influential Grey Zone blog. Now, what's then further interesting is that those captured prisoners have been offered to Ukraine by supposedly the CSP DPA fighters from Mali want to give the captured Russian mercenaries to Ukraine as a sign of support and solidarity.
Wow.
So the message to Ukrainian brothers: dear Ukrainian brothers, we are armed CSP DPA forces. We would like to express our solidarity with your fight against Russian criminals. We have captured a significant number of Wagner's mercenaries, and we want to give you these prisoners as a sign of support and solidarity. This gesture is aimed to help you in your struggle for justice and freedom. We hope that this will help strengthen your sides in common victory. Now, I can't confirm that, but it could well be the case. And that'd be pretty fascinating if indeed it is. I'm just going to ask.
I'm not sure Ukraine wants them, but still, it's pretty significant. It just shows you how the Russia's plans for Africa could really bite them in the butt. This is way worse than Mogadishu, you know.
Yeah. So really, really interesting, and then it gets even more funky, right? So, first of all, it's worth knowing that in Mali, the Russians of Wagner have been committing a huge number of horrific crimes anyway. One of the most notorious was a massacre of 500 people in one of the villages in Mali, and that was in 2023. That's reported in The Guardian here, so you can go and you can look that up. But the latest I've heard, and this is unconfirmed, but there is unconfirmed reports that Ukrainian special forces were involved in the ambush on Wagner in Mali. Now, we know that Ukrainian special forces have been in Sudan fighting against the Russians there to try and stop the Russians being able to get influence in these regions, but also to line their pockets to be able to fight the war in Ukraine, right? So it's in the best interest for the Ukrainians to actually stop the Russians outside of Ukraine. You might think, what are you doing there? You should be in Ukraine fighting. But actually, it's all part of the same thing, right? And this is one of the ways that Russia get their money. And their money supports a war. So if Ukraine can stop them getting their money, then et cetera, et cetera. So there's supposedly some, some indication that Ukrainian forces are there. I don't know if it's fully, whether you can fully confirm that. But
so
I
what's
thought
that circle? Is that some kind of a patch? What is that identifying?
I don't know. It might be some kind of Ukrainian equipment or something. I don't really know, and I don't know where this photo is from. But yeah, so I just pinch of salt and all that. Yeah. But interesting.
I mean, it was my first thought. It was my first assumption. And when you said Tuareg, I was a little bit surprised, to be honest.
So Smil here says Azawad fighters are in control of Tinzawateni and further south of the Kidal region, said Mohammed Al-Maloud Ramadani, a spokesman of the alliance of predominantly Tuareg separatist armed groups. So I don't know what that means, but thanks to Smil, you've enlightened me at least somewhat. I appreciate that. So interesting. We'll keep an eye on that, see if anything sort of evolves from there. And then just finally, a few little nuggets here. So Russian military reporter and Alexander Karchenko reports that logistics on the Russian side are getting worse over time due to the abundance of drones on the Ukrainian side. So this goes to kind of what I've been talking about a lot. So what I said earlier in my video from this morning was that my opinion, looking at the stats from like Tuchny and others, are that Ukraine are producing and using more drones than the Russians. There are claims from some Ukrainians and some, well, mainly Ukrainians actually, that the Russians are using more drones. But the claims from the Russians are that the Ukrainians are using more drones. And then there are some claims from the Ukrainians that the Ukrainians are using more drones. So everyone is claiming opposites. Well,
there's different kinds of drones for different kind of purposes in different parts of the front line. So you could have more of one kind of drone in one area, like maybe, for instance, a bunch of those plywood recon drones that we're hearing about, that the Russians seem to have figured out how to mass produce. Russia lags behind, but they do, in that planned economy, they can just say, oh my God, we're just going to make 100,000 of these, craptastic recon drones, and bada bing, there you go. You've got more drones than the Ukrainians in that one area, in that one job. Essentially, it may be that Ukraine has more FPV drones. They certainly have more kinds of. Oh, look, it is a Ukrainian Trident. You're right.
But then who is that guy? But anyway, yeah. But sorry, carry on. Thanks,
Um,
Chris.
so yeah, I would say that you know, Ukraine for right now probably has more FPV drones,
Yeah,
but I know they don't have more recon drones. I know that Russia is
yeah,
using those fixed wing mass produced plywood, utilizing the SIM cards, utilizing Ukraine's own
yeah. Kyivstar.
cellular,
Yeah.
and that is something that can be easily fixed and easily blocked. I can tell you, there are ways to do it, and so I think that Ukraine will fix that problem. But again, like I said before, it's a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
You know,
So, like looking at stats, and I need to speak to Daniela from Turchny, but certainly it has been clear that the stats have been very much in favour of the Ukrainians for the last sort of 6 months, or no more really. So since the turn of the year, and that's excellent news. Whether that's changing, I don't know. But this guy is saying that things are bad. So he says even a year ago in Robotina, they were dismounted when they're attacking a kilometer from the positions, but now they're dismounting from armor 8 to 10 kilometers behind the front. However, there are no available solutions to the problem. It's just an abundance of drones are causing all sorts of issues. There's a few interesting things here. So advanced logistics begins when trucks cannot reach. Near Roboton in 2023, we'd be thrown into a Tiger vehicle a kilometer from our positions. Just a year, enemy drones began to fly much further and more often, and now the armor is unloaded 8 to 10 kilometers from the front line. Next comes advanced logistics, and these are at the front are enormous, and transportation options are severely limited. They jump into quieter places using motorcycles and ATVs, and they drag everything only with their feet into the most inaccessible places. Logistics capabilities are declining, but the needs of the front are not becoming less, so more and more places are appearing on the map where cargo can only be delivered by unmanned systems. And I've seen people dragging artillery, dragging ammunition boxes by hand. For this, at the front, they use Mavics and FPV drones, regular ones without drops. It's impossible to carry anything heavier than a water bottle this way, and we don't have any heavy drones. There are many samples shown at exhibitions, but I've not seen them in the front lines. I've seen ground-based drones, and these are all prototypes that fall into the hands of infantry, and they stop working after a couple of days of operation. And then he talks about how, at the moment, things are made better by having foliage on the trees, but come autumn and winter time, it's going to be even worse. And there's no magic wand, just hard, painstaking work that needs to start now. So that's a kind of damning indictment of logistical travails that the Russians are facing at the moment.
And frankly, the Ukraine side too is it's similar. It's
Yeah. And the other nugget of news, not good news, fires engulfed a mine in Donetsk where 86 miners were inside due to Russian shelling the mine. I don't know the outcome of that, but obviously that's challenging. Ukraine needs to obviously keep their natural resources production going as they, as it, allows them to prosecute the war and pay for it. Just on the drone front, a question for you, James. Can heavy lift drones carry a combatant? I mean, I can answer this. Yes, technically they can, but they
do exist. They're just not common, and they're really expensive.
Yeah, the UK has a number of these. UK have what was the name of the drone? I can't remember it. Anyway, the UK right at the beginning of the war said, "Look, we're happy to provide these," but it's one thing having them; it's another thing being able to use them effectively. I mean, the bigger they are,
producing them, and then you've got electronic warfare interference, and then you're a giant target flying through the air.
That was my point. Like, is bigger. You can see it more easily. It's noisier, and so therefore there is a challenge. But that's not to say they aren't useful. Maybe like further back from the front for other things, or for quickly transporting someone in difficult terrain, or that's not quite on a contact line or whatever. There are drones that are being, I think, applied to all sorts of different problems as a solution. Just some thanks here. Thanks to Jesper Peterson. Thank you, my Danish friend. I really appreciate that. We have some new members. So Loan Nguyen, I have butchered the pronunciation of your name, no doubt. Yes, that's what I said. You weren't listening. Richard Bennett, thanks, mate. Always kind with his gifting of you've caught the sun there today, James. Richard Bennett. Thanks for your generosity, Richard. And Just James Ramdom. 7080, thank you for becoming a member. And Stephen Bendal, is more equipment getting through now, James?
You know,
Have you heard?
it's patchy, and there are some units that have it and some that don't. And I can tell you, I have personal friends who didn't get the equipment in time, and they are no longer extant. They are no longer among the living. And
yeah. I mean, they from just anecdotally, I see like the use of more shelling. So it seems that they have more shells, but then it's just a constant need.
Logistics takes time, and that's why this 7-month delay on the part of the Republicans was so deadly, because it screwed up the whole logistics supply train. So it's not just they wave a magic wand and then now everything's there. No.
Still going to take a couple of months before some of those big ticket items get. Thanks to Suzanne Melendi, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships is really kind. And Julian Roster, legend that is. With the destruction of 3 rail ferries at the Kerch Bridge, still that much of a high value target? Or is Ukraine waiting for the F-16s before taking it out? So just to get my head around the question, like those 3 railway ferries were incredibly significant because they can't replace them, and they can no longer. That's what they were using to transport heavy equipment across the Kerch Strait. And so they have to now rely on the bridge, but the bridge can't supposedly take really heavy railway cargo. Well, there has been footage of it with some railway cargo on it. So, but they've been preferring to use those railway ferries, and now they've lost them all, and you can't just get them like that. Now, Ukraine waiting for F-16s to take out the bridge. I don't know if that's a question about the bridge. Yeah. Is the bridge still that much of a target? I personally, there are two thoughts here. That one, they're not hitting it because it isn't that much of a target. And actually, I've heard this from various people and some quite high up people. But then there are other like quite high up people, like I think Bunov said this again recently, that it will get hit soon. Like it is the top target. And so therefore the thought is, well, you would if you could, you answer you can't. So at the moment they can't. And what you need to hit that bridge is you need the right weapons. Something like the Taurus, a cruise missile, would be perfect. Storm Shadow would be all right, but you'd probably need quite a lot of them. And in order to send quite a lot of Storm Shadow missiles at one time, you need quite a few planes to do that. And actually, they've only got a couple of planes that can fire those Storm Shadows, which is why you usually only ever see like a couple of them hit, like 2 or 4 or whatever. So I think it's just very difficult for Ukraine to take out the Kerch Bridge, because they've exhausted. The last one was done by that lorry, most probably, and that was just a really well executed plan. But now that's not something you can repeat. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been thinking about this very question a lot, and because it's really been bugging me, and kind of what I can surmise is, they quote unquote took out the Kerch Bridge at least once before, but it wasn't a permanent thing. I think if they're going to take out this bridge, they want to take it out permanently, like for good, and they want Russia to have no other alternative. So, in other words, yeah, you're right. It'll take a lot of these your Storm Shadows or what have you to really and truly destroy that bridge. Maybe what they're waiting for is when there's a trainload of munitions crossing that bridge.
So that it was just so, I don't know, it was just completely serendipitous, completely fortuitous that railway cargo of fuel was across there when that truck went across and blew up. But it was like you couldn't have asked for a better outcome there. I can't see that munitions would do as much damage as what they did there. You would just have to rain down all hell on it,
right? And multiple places.
You're
right. But maybe they're waiting for a juicier target, basically.
But I wonder whether if you just keep threatening to do this, that the Russians. So there was this claim the other day that the Russians had taken all their air defenses and pushed it to Kerch, right? Because they want to protect that, and they're afraid of the Ukrainians. Just, are double bluffing, I think that could be genius, which is like, we're going to hit the Kerch Bridge. Yeah, it's our top target. They pull all their best air defense systems, and then Ukraine just hammer Saki Airfield and Belbek Airfield because they pulled all their air defenses to Kerch. Then, I reckon that's a pretty good solution as well.
Well,
So
and also you've got the rail line running through Zaporizhia and along Berdyansk and what have you there. And I don't know what the state of that rail line is. So maybe
it's got to be a top target.
Yeah.
But then, when you take out rail lines, you really got to take out bridges rather than the railway line, because you can easily fix a railway line. Right. Thanks, Dave Spalding, for becoming a member. And Margaret de Velden, thank you so much for your Canadian love. Just got in and wanted to send love. Appreciated. I've well received that love. Thank you. That's really good. I'm going to have to shoot in a second because my partner is going to castrate me. Because I spend too much time speaking to you guys. But I just wanted, I felt I had to do my lost video because it just frustrates me when I spend all that time doing a video and then YouTube go, no, don't like look at that thing that you got in there. And you're like, really? But anyway, yes. Are there any last things you want to say, my good man? And by the way, people can find...
whyukraine.com and my YouTube channel, of course, which is Why Ukraine: The Last Alliance. Yeah, there we go. And talking about the drone warfare, if you'd like to help Ukraine fight Russian electronic warfare, go to whyukraine.com and you can physically buy those things they go directly to the units that are using them, and they get installed. And and I'm glad you're ending early, Jonathan. Not that I don't like being here, but I was up before God to make this trip across Ukraine.
Good on you, mate. Good on you.
So I'm going to spend the week here building drones, and I don't know if I'm going to publish any footage while I'm here, but certainly when I get back home.
Good luck to that, and please go and support what James is doing. I am JR is we are in the middle of trying to sort out a NAFO truck, but it's just taking a bit longer. So this is we've been wanting to do I've been wanting to do fundraising for ages, and it just takes an awful long time.
It sure does.
And so thanks for your patience, guys. I know Chris, who's on there, Chris Jones on there, Clockwork Chris, has been helping out with NAFO patch design, and it will happen. Just, we're doing it at the moment. Aussie Bugger says, I heard that the railway line, so that one down through Zaporizhia, was in fact a pipeline that someone mistook for a railway line. I think I know exactly what you're talking about, Aussie. And that happened when they were looking at some extended part of it that went further on. But that railway line has gone at least to Mariupol, certainly from Taganrog. And I presume they are going to take that all the way through to Zaporizhia. But there is a time where something was struck and people thought it was the railway line, but it was actually some pipeline. So, yes. Anyway, that's enough of my bumbling on. Thanks, James. Thanks for popping on last minute. I really appreciate that, dude. Thank you very much to everyone else. I will get back to you tomorrow with all my usual stuff. It's holiday time at the moment, so I have children around. As much as I love my children, it means that my output is somewhat constrained by having to parent them occasionally. There's only so much parenting TikTok can do for them. But, anyway, take care, everybody, and last words to you, mate.
All right. Well, do pobачення, everybody, and Slava Ukraine.
Heroin Slava.